First contact and misunderstandings. The Meridian Alliance's first encounter with humans wasn't marked by grandiose speeches or ceremonial exchanges, but by a cup of hot chocolate. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth diplomatic vessel Aurora stood in the gleaming reception chamber of the Alliance's central hub, watching as High Commander Vex Thor of the Meridian Council stared at the steaming beverage she'd offered with all 6 of his eyes widening in alarm. "You wish me to consume this?" The translator struggled to convey the mix of horror and fascination in his harmonics. His crystalline exoskeleton shifted colors rapidly, a sign that Sarah's xenobiology training told her indicated extreme stress. "It's a traditional Earth comfort drink," Sarah explained, maintaining her warm smile despite the growing tension in the room. "We share it as a gesture of friendship." The assembled alien diplomats exchanged urgent glances. Several of them began backing away slowly, their defensive plates rising. Sarah noticed the chamber's security drones shifting position, their sensor arrays focusing intently on the innocent cup of cocoa. What Sarah couldn't know was that in the past 1,000 years of Meridian history, only one species had ever offered food or drink during first contact, the now extinct Thorax, who had used chemically laced beverages to sedate and subjugate 3 civilizations before they were stopped. "This is unprecedented," whispered Ambassador Ctal, a towering insectoid whose antennae were vibrating with anxiety. To deploy psychological warfare techniques so brazenly, during first contact, no less. Sarah's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, there seems to be some misunderstanding. This is just hot chocolate. It's made from a plant called cacao, mixed with milk and sugar. We share it because it makes people happy." Her words sent another wave of alarm through the assembled aliens. The concept of offering something simply to create positive emotions in others was so foreign to their understanding that it could only be interpreted as a sophisticated attack. Meanwhile, in the observation chamber above, senior analysts Rinta furiously compiled data on human behavioral patterns. "Notice how they maintain facial muscle contractions we've termed smiling even during clear diplomatic tensions, and observe their persistent attempts to initiate physical proximity and sharing of resources without immediate reciprocation demands. Fascinating and disturbing," their superior, Director Malachor, rumbled. "No species achieves spacefaring capability while maintaining such seemingly inefficient social behaviors. There must be a deeper strategy we're missing." Back in the reception chamber, Sarah was beginning to realize just how deeply she'd misstepped. She set the hot chocolate down carefully and raised her empty hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Perhaps we should start over. I apologize if our customs have caused concern." But the damage was done. Within hours, the Meridian Alliance's intelligence networks were blazing with reports of humanity's weaponized kindness. Analysts pored over Earth's publicly shared cultural database, growing increasingly alarmed at the prevalence of concepts like random acts of kindness, paying it forward, and humanitarian aid. "They've systematized altruism," one report warned. "They've turned emotional manipulation into a science." The following weeks brought more incidents that only heightened the Alliance's concerns. A human medical ship offered free emergency care to a damaged Meridian patrol vessel. A human mining colony shared their water purification technology with a struggling frontier world. Each act of generosity was interpreted as another move in an incomprehensibly complex strategic game. Sarah found herself becoming the unofficial human ambassador, trying desperately to bridge the growing cultural chasm. She spent hours explaining basic human concepts that she'd never imagined would need explanation. "Yes, we help strangers without expecting anything in return," she told a panel of bewildered xenosociologists. "No, it's not part of a long-term psychological warfare strategy. Yes, we actually enjoy making others happy. No, that's not a coded message." The situation reached a critical point when a human child, part of the first Earth family allowed to visit the central hub, offered her favorite stuffed animal to a distressed Meridian youngling who had fallen and hurt itself. The act sent the hub into complete lockdown for 6 hours, while security forces analyzed the toy for hidden weapons or mind control devices. Sarah was summoned to an emergency council meeting, where she faced the combined scrutiny of the Alliance's highest-ranking officials. High Commander Vexthor's exoskeleton had settled into a deep purple of grave concern. "Captain Chin," he began, his translator struggling to convey the complexity of his harmonics, "we have studied your species extensively now. You possess advanced technology, yet persist in behaviors that any rational species would have evolved beyond. You share resources without guarantee of return. You aid competitors. You comfort strangers. You smile at potential threats." He leaned forward, all 6 eyes fixed on her. "Either your entire species is engaging in the most elaborate deception we have ever encountered, or, Sarah prompted when he trailed off, "or you represent something entirely outside our understanding of intelligent life, and I am not certain which possibility frightens us more." Sarah looked around the council chamber, at the assembled representatives of dozens of spacefaring races, all united in their inability to comprehend basic human kindness. For the first time, she truly understood that humanity's greatest challenge in space wouldn't be overcoming alien technologies or surviving hostile environments. It would be convincing the galaxy that love wasn't a weapon. "We're not trying to frighten anyone," she said softly. "We're just being human. And if you'll give us a chance, maybe we can show you why that's not such a scary thing after all." The council chamber fell silent. In that moment, as the assembled aliens struggled to process her words, humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most terrifying enigma was cemented. Not because of their weapons or their technology or their potential for violence, but because they had achieved something the Meridian Alliance had long thought impossible. They had weaponized peace itself, and no one knew how to defend against that. The test of resilience. 3 months after the hot chocolate incident, humanity faced its first true test in the galactic community. The crisis began on the frontier world of HFY, a bustling trade hub where a dozen species coexisted in an uneasy peace. The first cases appeared in the lower markets, Meridian traders suddenly collapsing, their crystalline exoskeletons turning cloudy and brittle. Dr. Maya Patel stood in the quarantine ward of the human medical ship Nightingale, studying infection patterns that made her blood run cold. The disease, whatever it was, had already jumped species barriers. 3 different alien races were showing symptoms, each manifestation more terrible than the last. "The Meridian Alliance has quarantined the entire sector," her colleague, Dr. James Wong, reported grimly. "They're following standard containment protocols. No ships in or out until the threat is neutralized." "And if it can't be neutralized?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd read enough of the Alliance's medical histories to understand their approach to pandemic threats. James's expression darkened. "Then they'll neutralize the sector instead." The Meridian Alliance's solution to uncontrollable outbreaks was brutal but effective. Complete sterilization of the affected area. They'd done it twice before in their history, sacrificing millions to save billions. It was, by their logic, the only rational response. But humanity had other ideas. Within hours of the quarantine announcement, Earth's medical response fleet mobilized. Leading them was the Nightingale, with Maya and her team at the forefront. The Alliance Council was bewildered by the humans' insistence on intervening. "You understand," High Commander Vexthor transmitted, "that entering the quarantine zone is a death sentence. Even if you survive the infection, protocol demands the sector's sterilization proceed as scheduled." "We understand," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the stakes. "We're going in anyway." The Alliance observers watched in fascinated horror as human medical ships breached the quarantine, carrying volunteer crews who knew they might never return. Their behavior defied all logical analysis, risking everything to save beings they barely knew, with no guarantee of success or reward. Maya's team worked tirelessly, combining Earth medical knowledge with data from every affected species. They set up treatment centers, coordinated with local healers, and began the painstaking process of understanding the plague's mechanism. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Wong, analyzing tissue samples from different species, noticed something odd about the infection's protein structures. They weren't just similar across species, they were identical. "This isn't natural evolution," he declared during an emergency conference. "These proteins are engineered. Someone designed this plague to cross species barriers." The revelation sent shockwaves through the quarantine zone. A manufactured plague meant this wasn't just a medical crisis, it was an attack. But Maya and her team didn't have time to worry about the implications. They were too busy using this new understanding to develop a treatment. Days blurred into weeks. The human medical teams worked without rest, even as some of their own began showing symptoms. Maya herself collapsed twice from exhaustion, but refused to evacuate. The Alliance observers documented everything, particularly noting how the humans continued treating members of all species equally, even when their own were at risk. They're sacrificing optimal survival probability for inclusive treatment protocols, one analyst reported. It's simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. 26 days into the crisis, Maya's team synthesized an effective treatment. The protein disruptors they developed worked across all affected species, breaking down the engineered plague molecules without damaging natural tissues. The recovery rate was remarkable, but the Alliance was more shocked by what happened next. Instead of hoarding the treatment or using it as leverage, humanity immediately shared the formula with every affected world. They distributed their entire supply to the hardest-hit areas, waiting until last to treat their own infected. When the crisis finally ended, the death toll was less than 1,000, a miracle compared to the millions that might have died under the Alliance's containment protocols. But the political aftermath was just beginning. "You had the cure," Vex Thor said during the formal debrief, his crystalline form shifting through colors of confusion. "You could have named your price, demanded concessions. Instead, you gave it away freely." Maya, still exhausted from weeks of non-stop work, smiled faintly. "That's not how we do things." "So your people keep saying," Vex Thor replied. "But surely there must be some deeper strategy. No species achieves space travel while maintaining such inefficient ethical priorities." "Maybe we achieved space travel because of those priorities, not despite them," Maya suggested. "Cooperation, sacrifice, caring for others. These aren't weaknesses. They're the reason we're here at all." The Alliance Council spent months analyzing the HFY incident, trying to understand humanity's actions through their own cultural lens. They documented the humans' apparent disregard for personal safety when others were in need, their insistence on treating all species equally, and their baffling habit of sharing vital discoveries without demanding compensation. Their conclusion was unsettling. Humanity's altruistic behavior wasn't a facade or a temporary strategy. It was fundamental to their nature, and that made them more unpredictable, and thus more dangerous, than any hostile species the Alliance had ever encountered. Meanwhile, in the rebuilt markets of HFY, something unprecedented began to happen. Alien merchants started offering free samples to customers. Local healers began treating patients without demanding immediate payment. Small acts of kindness, once seen as suspicious or weak, became more common. The humans, it seemed, were contagious in more ways than one, and their strain of compassion proved harder to resist than any engineered plague. The breaking point. The swarm came without warning. One moment, the human colony of New Eden was celebrating its first successful harvest. The next, the sky turned black with Ravager ships, the infamous raiders who had terrorized the galaxy's outer rim for centuries. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Hyperion, watching tactical displays light up with incoming hostile signatures. The Ravagers had chosen their timing well. The nearest Alliance patrol was 3 days away at maximum speed. "They're broadcasting their usual terms," her tactical officer reported. "Full surrender and resource tribute, or total annihilation." Elena's expression hardened. The Ravagers had never encountered humans before, and they were about to learn why that had been fortunate for them. Send our response. On the colony's surface, Marcus Chen, Sarah Chen's younger brother and the colony's chief engineer, was already mobilizing the civilian population. Unlike other species who typically fled or surrendered to Ravager attacks, the colonists moved with practiced precision, following emergency protocols that no one had honestly expected to need. They're not retreating, the Ravager commander, a cybernetically enhanced being known only as Apex, observed with mild confusion. Scanning shows they're fortifying positions, and they're moving their weakest members to shelter first, not their leadership. The first wave of Ravager dropships encountered something no previous raid had prepared them for: organized resistance from civilians. Farmers turned their irrigation systems into defensive barriers. Construction workers used their equipment as makeshift weapons. Even the colony's children contributed, serving as runners to coordinate the defense. Aboard the Hyperion, Alina watched with pride as her crew executed maneuvers that the Ravagers' tactical computers couldn't seem to predict. Human ships didn't break formation and flee when outnumbered. They didn't abandon their wounded. Instead, they fought with what appeared to be total disregard for their own survival, yet demonstrated precise coordination that spoke of extensive training. Their tactics make no sense, Apex transmitted to his fleet. They're sacrificing tactical advantages to protect civilian populations. They're dividing their forces to rescue damaged ships that should be abandoned. This defies all strategic logic. But the true shock came after the first wave of Ravagers were captured. Instead of executing the prisoners or enslaving them, the only two outcomes their species had ever known, the humans did something unprecedented. They provided medical care. Marcus found himself helping treat wounded Ravagers in the colony's medical center, working alongside the same people who had just tried to kill them. Why? A captured Ravager asked him, genuine confusion in its synthesized voice. We would not show you such mercy. Maybe that's exactly why we should show it to you, Marcus replied, adjusting a medical scanner. Someone has to break the cycle. The battle raged for 3 days. The Ravagers' superior numbers and technology were matched against humanity's unpredictable tactics and unshakable determination to protect their own. But the true turning point came when Alina's fleet detected something in the Ravager communication patterns. Sir, her communications officer reported, I'm picking up distress signals, not from their damaged ships, from their homeworld. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. The Ravagers weren't raiding for conquest or cruelty. They were desperate. Their civilization was dying, their resources nearly depleted. They raided because they saw no alternative. Alina made a decision that would be debated in military academies for generations to come. She opened a direct channel to Apex. Your people are starving, she said without preamble. That's why you're here. But there's a better way. Let us help you. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. When Apex finally responded, there was something new in his synthetic voice, something that might have been hope. The aftermath of what became known as the Battle of New Eden sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The feared Ravagers, terror of the Outer Rim, not only ceased their raids but entered into a formal alliance with humanity. Human agricultural experts were dispatched to their homeworld. Ravager technology was adapted for peaceful purposes. The Meridian Alliance watched these developments with growing unease. First, they defeat one of the galaxy's most feared warrior cultures, High Commander Vexthor observed. Then they turn them into allies through kindness. This goes beyond psychological warfare. They're rewriting the fundamental rules of interspecies relations. On New Eden, Marcus watched as former Ravager warriors worked alongside human farmers, learning to grow crops in soil they once would have stripped for resources. You know, he told one of them, my sister caused quite a stir by offering an Alliance commander hot chocolate. Would you like to try some? The Ravager, its cybernetic systems gleaming in the sunset, considered this. Is this how humanity conquers? One beverage at a time. Marcus laughed. We don't want to conquer anyone. We just think everyone deserves a chance to be better than their past. The news of how humanity had handled the Ravager crisis spread rapidly through the galaxy. Some species saw it as proof of humanity's strength. Others saw it as evidence of an unfathomably subtle form of conquest, victory through forced kindness. But in the rebuilt streets of New Eden, where humans and reformed Ravagers now lived and worked side by side, the truth was simpler. Humanity hadn't won by being stronger or more cunning. They had won by being exactly what they had always been, stubbornly, impossibly, unshackably human. And that was beginning to look like the most revolutionary force the galaxy had ever encountered. The ripple effect. One standard galactic year after the Ravager crisis, the Meridian Alliance's central hub had changed in ways that made its traditional members deeply uncomfortable. Alien merchants had begun adopting human customs, offering free samples, and what they called friendship discounts. Young aliens were being caught performing random acts of kindness, a concept that had required 3 emergency council sessions to properly define as a potential security threat. Ambassador Lyra Wells, who had replaced Sarah Chen as Earth's primary diplomatic representative, found herself becoming an unofficial consultant on human behavior. Her office was constantly flooded with requests for clarification on human customs that other species found simultaneously fascinating and alarming. But what is the strategic advantage? Asked Cuddle, the insectoid ambassador who had once feared a cup of hot chocolate. Why do humans insist on celebrating other species' cultural holidays? There isn't one, Lyra explained for what felt like the 1000th time. We just enjoy learning about other cultures and sharing in their joy. The concept of doing something purely for others' emotional benefit was still so foreign that many species had begun sending observers to Earth, trying to understand what they saw as humanity's most powerful weapon, their capacity for genuine altruism. Dr. Zena, a prominent Meridian synapsychologist, established the first human behavior research institute on the Central Hub. Her initial findings sent ripples of concern through the Alliance's highest levels. The humans aren't pretending, her report declared. Their social behaviors aren't a sophisticated form of manipulation. They're genuine. More alarmingly, these behaviors appear to be contagious. She had documented hundreds of cases of alien species beginning to imitate human social patterns. Young Meridians were being caught sharing resources without calculating immediate benefits. Ravager expatriates had started organizing volunteer groups. Even the traditionally isolationist Quantum Collective had begun establishing cultural exchange programs. In the hub's diplomatic quarter, Ambassador Tilleri of the Quantum Collective found herself in an unprecedented situation. A human child, visiting with her diplomat parents, had drawn a picture of Tilleri's crystalline form and given it to her as a gift. "But what do I owe in return?" Tilleri asked, her crystalline surface rippling with confusion. "Just a smile," the child replied. "If you can smile, can you smile?" The security footage of Tilleri attempting to reconfigure her crystalline structure to approximate a human smile became an instant sensation across the hub. More importantly, it marked the first recorded instance of a Quantum Collective member attempting to adapt their physical form purely to please another species. The Alliance Council convened an emergency session to address what some members were calling the human contagion. High Commander Vexthor, his exoskeleton now showing traces of human-inspired decorative patterns, a fact he seemed embarrassingly aware of, presided. "The situation is unprecedented," he began. "Humanity's influence is spreading faster than any plague. Species that have been in conflict for generations are beginning to cooperate. Trade agreements are being modified to include concepts like mutual benefit and cultural exchange. There are even reports of Meridian youth engaging in something they call volunteer work." Lyra, invited to address the council, listened to their concerns with diplomatic patience. "I understand this is challenging for many of you," she said. "Humans spent thousands of years learning that cooperation and kindness aren't weaknesses. We fought wars, faced extinction-level events, and ultimately discovered that our greatest strength was our ability to care for each other. "We're not trying to change anyone. We're just being ourselves." But change was already happening, spreading through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. The Ravagers, once feared raiders, had become renowned agricultural experts, freely sharing their reformed technology. The Quantum Collective, inspired by human art, had begun creating purely aesthetic crystal formations. Even the Meridian Alliance found itself reluctantly adapting, introducing concepts like public welfare and community support into its governance. Not everyone welcomed these changes. A movement called the Traditional Values Coalition emerged, warning against the dangerous human influence. They pointed to incidents of young aliens refusing to follow traditional hierarchies, choosing instead to pursue what they called happiness, another troublesome human concept that had required extensive alliance documentation to define. Dr. Zenna's research team documented what they called the humanity effect, a steady increase in cooperative behavior, emotional expression, and altruistic actions among species exposed to human influence. More worryingly, from the traditional perspective, these changes appeared to be permanent. Once a species begins adopting human social patterns, her report noted, they show no sign of reverting to their previous behavioral norms. It's as if humanity is awakening something that was always present in other species, but suppressed by our evolutionary and cultural development. In the hub's recreation sectors, previously sterile and efficient spaces were being transformed. Aliens had begun creating art, playing games, and even attempting human concepts like jokes, though their success rate remained questionably low. The Meridian Alliance found itself facing an entirely new kind of crisis, one that couldn't be solved by force or contained by quarantine. "They're making us question everything," Ambassador Catal admitted privately to Lyra. "Not through argument or force, but simply by showing us a different way to exist. How do we defend against that?" Lyra's response was to invite him to Earth's first interspecies cultural festival, where dozens of alien races would gather to share their art, food, and traditions. "Maybe," she suggested, "the question isn't how to defend against it, but why you feel you need to." As the festival date approached, the Alliance's Security Council argued endlessly about potential threats and hidden agendas, but they couldn't stop their own people from eagerly signing up to participate. Humanity's greatest victory, it seemed, wasn't winning wars or solving crises. It was showing the galaxy that there was more to life than survival. And that revelation was changing everything. The new understanding. The Drachnid Empire had watched the spread of human influence across the galaxy with growing alarm. For millennia, they had been the undisputed masters of psychological warfare, using fear and intimidation to maintain their power. Now, they faced something their vast intelligence networks couldn't properly analyze: the power of kindness. Fleet Admiral Kira Patil, daughter of Dr. Maya Patil, who had helped solve the Nexus VI crisis, stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship Prometheus, facing what appeared to be an inevitable conflict. The Drachnid Empire had issued an ultimatum. Humanity would cease its cultural contamination of the galaxy or face annihilation. "They fear us," Ambassador Lyra Wells observed from her position beside Kira. "Not because of our weapons or our technology, but because we represent something they can't control." The Drachnid fleet was impressive. Dark, biomechanical ships that seemed to absorb light itself. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, their tactical capabilities legendary, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity before. Instead of mounting a military response to the Drachnid ultimatum, humanity launched what they called Operation Understanding. While the Prometheus and its battle group maintained a defensive position, hundreds of civilian ships began broadcasting across all frequencies, not threats or demands, but stories. Personal tales from every human colony and settlement, stories of cooperation with other species, accounts of friendships forged across biological and cultural divides. The Drachnid Empire's response was immediate and violent. They launched their first wave of attack, expecting the human fleet to either flee or mount a desperate defense. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. The human ships took damage to protect civilian vessels, not just their own but those of every species in the sector. Emergency rescue teams launched into space during active combat to save stranded crew members, including damaged Drachnid ships. Even as the battle raged, human medical ships stationed themselves in neutral space, offering aid to any wounded, regardless of species or allegiance. On the Prometheus's bridge, Kira received a surprising report. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're detecting unusual patterns in the Drachnid fleet. They're younger crew members. They're asking questions. About us. About why we fight the way we do." The Drachnid Empire had maintained control through a rigid hierarchical structure, conditioning their population from birth to obey without question. But exposure to human behavior was causing something unprecedented. Their people were beginning to think independently. A young Drachnid officer, witnessing a human rescue team save one of their abandoned crew members, broke protocol and opened a direct channel to the Prometheus. "Why?" the officer demanded. "Why save those your leaders have declared enemies?" "Because they needed help," Kira replied simply. "That's all the reason we need." The response spread through the Drachnid fleet like a virus. The Empire's carefully maintained control began to crack as more of their crew members witnessed humanity's actions. Stories from the civilian broadcasts began to circulate among their ranks, leading to questions that their rigid society had never had to answer. The Drachnid Emperor himself, a being who hadn't shown himself publicly in centuries, demanded a direct audience with human representatives. In the neutral space between the fleets, aboard a specially constructed diplomatic vessel, Kira and Lyra found themselves face to face with an entity that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. "Your species," the Emperor's translated voice resonated with a mixture of fear and fascination, "is dismantling the very foundations of galactic society. Not through force, not through superiority, but through kindness." The word seemed to cause him physical discomfort. "How do we fight this?" "Maybe you don't have to fight it," Lyra suggested. "Maybe there's a better way. We're not trying to dismantle anything. We're trying to build something. Together. All of us." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. "Our empire is built on strength, on the natural order of dominance and submission. What you propose, it defies everything we know." "Knowledge can change," Kira said. "We learned that on Earth, over thousands of years, strength isn't just about power over others. Sometimes the greatest strength is in working together, in helping each other grow." What followed was not a traditional peace treaty. Instead, humanity proposed something unprecedented: an open exchange program. Human teachers, artists, and civilians would be welcomed in Drachnid space, while young Drachnids would have the opportunity to visit Earth and other human worlds. The Meridian Alliance watched in amazement as the most feared empire in known space began to transform. Not through conquest or submission, but through understanding. The Drachnid Empire didn't fall, it evolved. Their technological brilliance, freed from the constraints of rigid hierarchy, led to innovations that benefited all species. Years later, at the first Galactic Cultural Exchange Festival, held in the former Drachnid throne world, beings from across the galaxy gathered to share their stories, their art, and their dreams. High Commander Vexthor, his exoskeleton now proudly displaying both traditional Meridian patterns and human-inspired designs, gave the opening speech. "We once feared humanity would destroy our way of life," he admitted. "We were right, in a way. They showed us that life could be more than survival. They taught us that the galaxy's greatest strength lies not in our differences, but in how we bridge them." Ambassador Lyra, watching the celebration from a quiet corner, felt a tug on her sleeve. A young Drachnid, their biomechanical form adapted to express emotions in ways their ancestors would have found horrifying, held up a clumsily made drawing. "I made this for you," the child said. "No strategic value, just because I wanted to make you happy." Lyra accepted the drawing with a smile, remembering a similar scene years ago with a quantum collective ambassador. The cycle was continuing, kindness spreading from one generation to the next, across species and empires, and the vast distances of space. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something far more powerful. They had taught it how to love. And that, as it turned out, was the greatest force in the universe.